And good morning, America. Thanks for joining us today on Unbound Radio. I am your host for this hour, Sean from the SGT Report, and I'm very happy to have on the line my two favorite contributors, my only contributors and my best buddies from SGT Report, Rory and Peter. Guys, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Guys, I just wanted to take the first part of today's show to talk about this idea that alternative news media, those of us in the business of sharing real news and real information, sort of the anti-Mockingbird media take on the world, it's easy for our detractors to label us quote-unquote doomers. And I just want to take a little time to dig into that a little bit. We today, for you folks listening, are going to cover some doomer news headlines, and we are going to juxtapose the reality versus the label doomer, which I think is an ad hominem attack, which is only about as effective as calling somebody a conspiracy theorist. All right, fellas, this one is from RT, Russia Today, and they write, Obama wins back the right to indefinitely detain you under NDAA. Now, as everyone may remember, Obama promised he would never sign the NDAA, which authorized the illegal detention of U.S. citizens that the government labels terrorists. He said he wouldn't sign it, but he signed it on New Year's Eve last year. Well, now a federal judge has sided with the plaintiffs originally by granting an injunction against Section 1021, prompting the Obama administration to request an appeal last year. Okay, so a judge had said this is unconstitutional. Obama, who said he would never sign it, then fought it because he does want to have the power. Well, on Wednesday this week, an appeals court in New York ruled in the government and once again allowed the White House to legally indefinitely detain Americans that fit in the category of enemy combatants or merely provide them with support. Rory, Peter, real quick, your take on this doomer news headline.
Enemy combatant is a very broad label. So does that, simply because I'm on this radio show and doing this, does that make me an enemy combatant because I disagree with the NDAA as a law?
And remember, the whole world is a battlefield now in this endless war on terror, Rory. So if you're labeled an enemy combatant, you may not know it because the charges will never be made public. You won't even know who your accuser is. They can put a bag over your head and take you down to a dungeon and indefinitely detain you. Peter, 15 seconds, your take.
Well, I remember reading an article not long ago where somebody with a "Don't Tread on Me" flag, they can be called an enemy combatant.
Yeah, or a Ron Paul supporter.
Right.
Well, it's all part of the new freedom, gentlemen. It's all part of the new America. Thanks for joining us today on UnboundRadio.com. When we come back, we have 5 or 6 other doomer news headlines that you're going to want to know about because the Mockingbird media probably won't cover it. Now, gentlemen, when we left off, we were talking about a doomer headline. Obama wins back the right to indefinitely detain you under NDAA. Well, here's one for you. Anybody paying attention who cares about truth and reality might be concerned that Detroit has declared bankruptcy. Here's a headline from Zero Hedge. The death of a city, Detroit's eulogy as delivered by Kevin Orr. Rory, why don't you take this one?
All right. After decades of fiscal mismanagement, plummeting population, employment and revenues, decaying city infrastructure, deteriorating city services, and excessive borrowing that provided short-term band-aids at the cost of deepening insolvency, the city of Detroit today is a shadow that it once was. The city does not provide basic and essential services to the residents who remain in the city. Crime is endemic. The city is infested with urban blight, which A, depresses property values, B, provides a fertile breeding ground for crime and tinder for fires, with the attendant disproportionate devotion of police and firefighting resources to abandoned lots, and C, compels the city to devote fresh resources to demolition. So in other words, they have no money, they have no tax base, they have no citizens, and there's crime running rampant with the people that are left.
You remember that old movie, Escape from New York? I think it was with Kurt Russell.
Yes.
Yeah, well, Escape from Detroit is probably the movie they ought to, do a remake of because, what we're seeing here is the de-evolution of the United States of America. When they globalized us and sent and offshored, all of our manufacturing, Detroit being an absolute case study, this is the future. of the United States under globalization. And, the scary part is that, as Brother John F. and others have pointed out, the people to whom promises have been made, whether they be unions or city workers or whoever, those people aren't going to get those pensions they were promised. All of the stuff, all of the goodies they were promised, all of the promises they made to themselves illegally through that political process from buying off politicians, all of those things are going to go away, and the governor, I think, is asking people to take 10 cents on the dollar if they get anything.
Less than 10 cents on the dollar. If all goes well, they'll get 10 cents. So, and I don't think they're even going to get that. I don't think they're going to get anything. I mean, you can call me a doomer, you can call me whatever you'd like. It really doesn't matter. But when I read a story like this, and these are facts, how can you say that I'm a doomer? I'm just looking at reality.
It's reality versus ad hominem labels, and that's the purpose of the first part of our show, is to point that out. Our listeners are well aware of what's going on. This next story ties in, I think, specifically with what we just read, because all of those folks to whom pensions were promised and retirement accounts were flourishing, and all of that money that's just going to disappear because it doesn't exist, because they were unfunded liabilities, those people may well find themselves on the welfare rolls and in need of government assistance as the reality of Detroit's situation becomes clear. Now, in this next story from Ethan Huff at Natural News, the title is "The Welfare States of America. Government food aid recipients now outnumber full-time private sector workers."
Yeah, and just one other thing about the Detroit thing. Just yesterday, I happened to be on the weatherchannel.com, and there's a pop-up there that shows you what Detroit looks like. It has about 20 or 30 pictures of apartment buildings and churches that are just in complete disrepair. So it's really eye-opening to see. But this article that you were talking about the welfare state of America, based on the latest available figures, the overall number of food welfare recipients today exceeds the number of regular working folks by 4 million, and the gap is widening. An anonymous foretelling of America's dire future, the more than 101 million people in America currently receiving government food aid represent 1/3 of the U.S. population. And comparatively, less than 1/3 of the U.S. population, 97 million people, currently have a viable full-time job.
It's a stunning statistic, an ominous of America's dire future. Okay? Is that a doomer line? It comes from Ethan Huff from Natural News. Is Ethan Huff a doomer, or is he dealing in reality when he writes, "The more than 101 million people in America currently receiving government food aid represents nearly 1/3 of the overall U.S. population. This is unsustainable." That is the reality. That's not being a doomer to address that reality. It's being an informed, concerned citizen in a republic that is quickly deteriorating, and being an informed, educated citizen who realizes he, she, all of us must take some steps in the effort to protect our families from what is clearly coming. Now that Detroit has declared bankruptcy, now that Detroit is in receivership, now that Detroit will be greened under Agenda 21, now that Detroit will be gutted and crime will take over, now that Detroit is really unrecoverable, now that the people who worked for Detroit will be destitute. These are the realities, and that is the purpose of this first segment of today's show. Let's move on, guys. We've got one that is just as equally concerning, and this comes from Michael Snyder over at Economic Collapse blog. The title is this: "The U.S. government will borrow close to $4 trillion this year." Now, for anybody paying attention, we know what's going on with the banks. We know that some $85 billion a month is finding its way into the mortgage market and into the hands of the banks. The money is being spent, and how quickly do we reach the point of no return? Well, many of us thought we'd reached the point of no return long before now, and yet things are still fairly normal. There's food in the grocery stores. The government is operating. These wars without end are continuing. So Michael Snyder writes, "When you add maturing debt to the new debt that the federal government is accumulating, the total is quite eye-catching. You see, the truth is that the U.S. government must not only borrow enough money to fund government spending for this year, it must also roll over existing debt that has reached maturity. Of course, the government never actually pays any of that old debt off. Instead, it essentially takes out new debts to cover the old ones. So the U.S. government is actually borrowing far more money each year than most Americans even realize. For fiscal year 2013, the U.S. budget deficit will be about $845 billion. But on top of that, the government will also have to borrow about $3 trillion to pay off old debt that is maturing. Overall, the U.S. government will borrow close to $4 trillion this year, and that number is likely to be even higher next year. So again, fellas, the reality is stark. The reality is painful. You can call it a doomer headline, or you can call it the juxtaposition of truth and reality versus what the Mockingbird media covers on a day-to-day basis. This is reality, is it not?
It is. And I'm very grateful for Michael Snyder putting it into a context that I can actually understand, that makes sense to me, makes sense to my family, and that is backed up by actual fact and numbers, and it has nothing to do with pop culture. This information from the economic collapse block is going to help me to make better decisions.
Well, let me ask you guys this. Peter, as it relates to your own family situation, what if you decided to run your household finances like the U.S. government runs ours? I mean, wouldn't you just take out another credit card to pay off the old credit card? To pay off the old credit card? And if you want to expand your style of living, maybe you want to buy that new car, maybe you ought to just get a loan that you can't quite pay for and then get another credit card to help you make those payments. Isn't that essentially what the U.S. government is doing?
If I lived that way, I'd eventually end up in debt prison. I mean, there's no way you can live that way.
Well, I think what allows the U.S. government to do it is the fact that the dollar remains the U.S. world's reserve currency. As long as the U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency, the U.S. government can get away with this. Unfortunately, as you fellows have posted, the BRICS, China, there is a move away from the dollar as the world's reserve currency, which eventually will bring this Ponzi to an end, just as the Ponzi in Detroit has also collapsed for all of those people promised pensions that were unfunded. Before we go, Rory, I think this one absolutely needs to be covered. The political class and the Snowden counteroffensive. This is from Jeffrey Tucker over at Laissez-Faire Books. Why don't you take it away?
All right. That Edward Snowden has put the whole political, corporate, and governing class in a bind with his revelations that a heretofore obscure agency has long been collecting all data on our digital lives. Snowden very plainly blew up the whole perception the government is somehow of, by, and for the people. For a few weeks, the ruling class hoped the whole thing would just go away. Maybe the NSA could continue to data mine, the corporations would continue to cooperate, and the 48-hour news cycle would eat this story same as any other political flash in the pan. Not so. That wholly owned government mouthpieces like Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina are disgracing themselves daily on national television by demanding that Snowden be forcibly returned and prosecuted.
Let me jump in because we're going to go to break here real quick. This picture he paints is a government straight out of a dystopian novel. That couldn't be more spot on. This is the Orwellian America of 2013, guys, right? Senator Graham and his supporters, men like John McCain and others, are painting this picture and attempting to paint this picture in the public, in the Mockingbird news media, that Snowden is a traitor for revealing the crimes of the NSA. Now, think about that. We live in a country now that wants to label people that have risked life and liberty for truth, and they want to label, this government wants to label those people traitors. They don't want to address the problems. They don't want to address the crimes. They don't want to address the questions that Mr. Snowden has raised. They just want to apply labels and ad hominem attacks and paint people in a bad light in the public sphere, and that's such a crime against our Constitution. My two contributors on a daily basis over at SGT Report are Peter and Rory, and they're both impeccable, decent, God-fearing, liberty-loving men with families, and I respect them both very much. Hey guys, just real briefly so the audience understands, when we are posting content over at SGT Report on a daily basis, where do you guys draw from? I mean, which is to say, if we are to wear the label of doomer proudly, then we must share that label with those sites that we so earnestly draw from. Sites we trust, like shtfplan.com, where our friend Max Slavo writes, or sites like Natural News. And I think one good rule of thumb is, we shall know them by their fruits, right?
There you go.
Does the tree bear good fruit? And I think that the sites that we post content from on a daily basis post very, very good, juicy fruit, and they're consistent. Peter, your take?
Well, I just wanted to say this week that I was really sad about Daily Bell, a site that we use a lot, and to see Anthony Weil, and maybe other people knew before we did, but just kind of very suddenly stopped posting, but we're thankful for everything that they've done over the time that they were on.
Yeah, I saw that too, and it really, really caught me by surprise. I didn't see it coming. If the Daily Bell can't make it, I mean, my goodness, what good work they were doing. And one of the things that was gratifying for me when I visited Alexa to get the traffic update on the Daily Bell is it revealed to me that 5% of their traffic was coming from SGT report. So I am very, very gratified that we are making a difference, guys, and I'm very, very gratified to both of you for being supporters on a daily basis. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you.
And
All right.
I want to make one more comment, and the sources are all right there on SGT report. Every source that I use, with very, very few exceptions, are all right there.
Yep.
And anybody that wants to know where we're getting information from, it's right there at your fingertip.
Right on the right-hand side of the page. Well, I'm going to end this segment by saying truth, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that is what we stand for at SGT Report. And if you don't know us by now, you may never know us. But thanks for tuning in, and thanks for supporting what we're trying to do on a daily basis.